The horse shied hard when he heard it. Not a cry, not quite, something weaker, breaking. He stilled the reins, listening as the sound slipped thin through the trees, barely holding together against the cold. He followed it anyway, boots crunching through frost that hadn't melted in days, each step slower than the last, and found her there. Collapsed against a fallen trunk, dress torn and damp, hands trembling over a child not yet born. Alone, cast out, no fire, no tracks leading back, like she'd been left where no one intended to return. "Don't send me back," she whispered. He didn't ask who, didn't ask what she'd done, because the way she held that pain, and the way she braced for refusal before he even spoke, told him someone already had. Before we ride deeper into this tale, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another journey through the dust, danger, and legends of the Wild West. Now, back to the trail. Elias Thorne did not leave his land without reason. Men came to him for cattle, for contracts, for decisions he made without stepping into town. It kept things quiet, ordered, predictable. He preferred it that way. The house stayed the same, the table set for one. The second chair never moved, no laughter, no voices. No risk. He had learned what came after those things, so he kept his world small, controlled, until the horse shied. He found her where the trees thinned and the ground hardened with frost, collapsed, barely upright, breath breaking in shallow pools that didn't reach deep enough. Elias stood over her a moment, still, watching. This was where men made decisions that followed them. He could turn back, ride on, leave her to whatever had already claimed her. No one would know, no one would ask. His life would remain untouched, quiet, simple, safe. Her hand tightened against her stomach. A sharp, strangled breath slipped through her teeth. Not weakness, pain, immediate, unstoppable. Elias exhaled once. Lo, that was the end of it. He stepped forward. "Easy," he said, though nothing about it was. She flinched anyway, not from him, from everything. Up close he saw it clearer. Dust ground into her skin. Fabric torn not by travel but by force. No supplies, no provisions, no chance. She was meant to be out here, left. "Stay with me," he said. Her eyes struggled to focus. You won't send me back." The words came out fragile, practiced, like she had asked them before. Elias didn't answer the question, didn't know the answer. He only said what mattered, "Not right now." It was enough. It had to be. The work came fast, too fast. He'd handled livestock births, seen it enough times to know what needed doing. But this was different, human, fragile in ways animals weren't. He moved carefully, hands steady, voice low, breathe. She tried, failed, tried again. Pain took over in waves that bent her forward, pulled raw sound from her chest that she tried to swallow down, like she wasn't allowed to make noise. "Don't hold it," he said. "That'll make it worse." She shook her head weakly. "Don't want them to hear." There was no one here. Just trees, cold, and whatever had chased her into it. Elias didn't argue, he just stayed. Time lost shape, moments stretched, broke, reformed, until a cry, small, sharp, alive. Elias wrapped the child in what cloth he could salvage, movements rough but careful, like strength held back on purpose. He placed the baby against her, her hands trembled, then steadied, her eyes closed. Relief didn't come as peace, it came as silence, heavy, final, like something had ended. She looked at him again after a long while. Fear hadn't left, it had only changed shape. "They'll say things," she whispered. "They already did." Elias said nothing. "They'll come," she added. He nodded once. He had already decided. The ride back was slow, deliberate. He adjusted his pace to her breathing, to the small weight cradled between them. The ranch came into view under a pale sky, unchanged, waiting. Elias dismounted first, helped her down with more care than he used on anything in years. At the door she hesitated, like crossing that threshold meant something she didn't understand yet. "This is temporary," he said. The words came out firm, necessary, for both of us. She nodded quickly, too quickly, like she would agree to anything that wasn't the cold. Elias stepped aside, let her in. The house didn't feel different yet, but it wasn't the same either, and he knew. Before the door even closed, nothing inside it would stay the way it was. Morning came gray and slow over the ranch, the kind of winter light that never truly brightened anything. It only revealed what had endured the night. Elias was up before it. He always was. He split wood in the yard while frost still clung to the rails, each strike of the axe landing clean and hard, the rhythm steadier than thought. The work warmed his hands and emptied his head. It was why he favored it. Inside the house, there was a woman recovering in his spare room. A child in a basket by the stove, and a silence unlike the one he had lived with all these years. Not broken, changed. That difference unsettled him more than noise ever could. He carried the last armload inside and set it down by the hearth. The fire had burned low. He crouched and stirred it back to life, feeding flame into coals until the room took on heat again. The baby made a small sound, not crying, just a restless, wavering noise that seemed too thin to belong to anything so small and newly alive. Elias glanced over. The basket sat near the stove, lined with folded blankets and one old flannel shirt he had cut down in the night because it was the softest cloth he owned. The child's face was red from sleep and effort, tiny mouth opening and closing as if arguing with the world already. He stood there longer than needed, studying it. The child did not look like trouble. It looked like trouble's proof. From the hallway came the faint scrape of movement. Elias straightened and turned just as Lena reached the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. She looked stronger than yesterday, not strong, just not near death. Her dark hair was loose and uncombed, falling over one shoulder. The clean dress he had left outside the door hung too large on her, but better that than the torn thing she had arrived in. Her face remained pale, her eyes shadowed from exhaustion. Still, she was standing. That alone felt stubborn. "You should still be lying down," he said. Her gaze went first to the baby, always first to the baby. Only after she saw the basket rocking gently from where he'd nudged it with his boot did some of the tightness leave her face. "I heard him," she said softly. "It's not a him yet, could be a tyrant." She looked at him then, uncertain whether he was joking. He wasn't sure either. Her mouth almost moved, not quite a smile, more the memory of how one worked. She crossed the room slowly and reached into the basket. The child quieted the moment her hand touched its chest. Elias looked away first. "There's broth," he said, "on the stove. I can make something. You can sit." She hesitated. The hesitation was becoming familiar already. She wore it before every answer, as if weighing whether obedience cost less than refusal. "I'm not helpless," she said. "No," Elias answered, "you're not recovered." That ended it. She sat at the table, and he poured broth into a bowl without asking whether she wanted any. He set bread beside it, thick cut, still a little stale but warmed by the stove. She thanked him like the meal embarrassed her. He took his place across from her out of habit more than intention, though he rarely shared his table with anyone. For a while only spoon against bowl filled the room. Then the child cried, sharp this time. Lena stiffened so fast the spoon rattled from her hand. Elias was already on his feet. He got to the basket a second before she did, then stopped, because he had no idea what came next. Lena reached around him and lifted the baby with careful, practiced instinct that looked strange on someone so new to it. The crying eased. She swayed once, not from habit but from fatigue, and Elias instinctively moved a chair behind her before she could refuse it. "Sit," he said again. This time she obeyed without protest. The child settled against her, wrapped in blanket and silence. Elias returned to his side of the table, though he did not continue eating. After a moment, Lena said, "His name is Daniel." The name entered the room gently and somehow changed its shape. Elias nodded once. "Daniel, then." She looked down at the child, as if speaking the name aloud had made him more real, and perhaps it had. For a while he thought that would be all. Then she said, very quietly, "Caleb never wanted a name picked." Elias kept his face still. He did not ask who Caleb was. He did not need to. He said naming things made people soft. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. He only liked what could be used. Elias reached for his coffee cup, though it had long gone cold. Lena stared at the child and kept speaking the way some people bled after holding pressure too long. "Caleb Rourke was my husband." The words landed with no more force than breath, but Elias felt them all the same. Husband meant lawful, public. It meant promises made where witnesses could see them. It meant whatever had been done to her had not happened in shadow. He said nothing. She seemed to expect nothing. "At first," she said, "he was not kind, but he was steady enough when sober. He liked that men looked at me. It made him proud in the beginning. Then it made him suspicious. Then angry. It never took much for him to choose which one." Elias listened without shifting. He drank when cattle prices fell. He drank when they rose. He drank when cards went bad and when they went well. "And if I looked tired, he said I was sulking. If I stayed quiet, he said I was hiding something. If I spoke to anyone too long, he remembered it at night." Her voice had no dramatic edge to it. That was what made it worse. She was not telling him a story. She was reciting whether that had lasted too long. "When I began to show, he counted months in front of people, smiling while he did it, like it was a joke he wanted others to enjoy first." She swallowed. "He said the child could not be his, said I'd found some man to warm my bed while he worked." Elia's grip tightened around the cup. He knew it was his. He asked. Her eyes lifted to his in surprise, perhaps because it was the first question he had asked at all. "Yes," she said, "he knew." The answer came without pause, not doubt. "Knowledge, then why say otherwise?" Lena let out a breath that sounded old. "Because if the child was another man's, he could be the wronged one. If the child was his, he was only a drunk husband with more responsibility coming." The fire popped between them. She continued more quietly. "People like a wounded man better than a cruel one, especially if he laughs while telling it." That Elias understood. Towns preferred simple versions. A familiar man with a bottle and a grin fit easier into mercy than a woman they had never fully accepted. Because she was Apache. Because she had married outside her people and never been entirely taken in by his. Because once a rumor chose a body, it rarely had trouble staying there. The women stopped speaking when I entered the store. Men looked too long or not at all. Caleb made sure the story reached every porch before I could answer it. Her jaw tightened. Then one night he came home more drunk than usual, called me filth, and said if I wanted another man's child so badly, I could birth it where that man found me. The room had gone still around her. "He dragged me out," she said, "not far enough to kill me quickly, just far enough that I would know what he meant." She did not cry, That disturbed Elias more than tears would have. He looked toward the window. Frost feathered the edges of the glass. Outside, the ranch spread wide and white and empty. Inside, a woman held her child as if her body still expected someone to take him. "I'm sorry," he said. The words sounded insufficient the instant they left him, thin as tinder against stone. But Lena looked at him with an expression he could not place at first. Then he understood. No one had said it to her, not once. The realization hit him harder than anger. She lowered her eyes quickly, as though ashamed to have shown anything at all. "The town did not think it was cruel," she said. "They thought it was what came of shame." Elias stood and crossed to the stove because staying seated felt impossible. He ladled more broth into a bowl, though no one had asked for it. It gave his hands a task. When he turned back, the child had begun fussing again. Lena tried shifting him higher, but fatigue made her clumsy. Elias set the bowl down and, after a brief hesitation, reached for the kettle instead. "Does he need feeding?" he asked. She blinked. "Eventually." That wasn't helpful. Something in her face changed then. A tiny startled flicker. It vanished fast, but he had seen it. "You ask questions like you expect wrong answers," she said. "I expect most things to go badly if left unattended." "That explains the woodpile." He looked at her, and there it was, the smallest trace of humor, uninvited, fragile, almost hidden under exhaustion. It should not have mattered. It did. He handed her the fresh bowl and took the old one away. She thanked him again. He did not tell her to stop. The day settled around small practicalities after that. He brought in more water. She slept between feedings. He checked the blankets by the basket and added another to the foot when he thought the room had cooled. Toward afternoon, he rode to the far shed for the old cradle his sister had once left here years ago after a visit, never imagining it would be used. He cleaned it himself in the yard before bringing it inside, scrubbing dust from the slats with a harshness better suited to punishment than wood. When he set it beside the stove, Lena stared. "I thought the basket was temporary," he said. Her fingers touched the edge of the cradle as though it might disappear. "You didn't have to do that." "No," Elias agreed, "but the basket's too shallow. If he starts turning, he'll prove ambitious." That almost smile came again, a little clearer this time. He spent the evening repairing a loose runner on the cradle while Lena sat nearby with Daniel. He worked at the table, shoulders bent, tools spread in neat order. Every so often he glanced up without meaning to, mother and child. The sight should have felt intrusive in his house. Instead, it felt impossible to ignore. Daniel slept with his fist tucked near his cheek. Lena watched him as if memorizing permission. At sunset, she said, "Why did you bring us here?" Elias did not answer immediately, because he did not know which answer was the true one, because leaving her there had been unthinkable, and that was not a thing he enjoyed examining. "Because you would have died," he said at last. She waited. He kept working. After a moment she said, "That's not the whole answer." "No," he said. "It's the part you need." The hammer tapped once more, gentle, precise. She let the rest go. That night he gave her the spare room without discussion and took the settee in the front room for himself, though his bed was broader and warmer. She objected once, softly. He ignored it. She knew better than to repeat herself. The house made different sounds after dark now. A child's restless breaths, floorboards creaking from late movement, the occasional hush of Lena's voice, too soft for words to carry. Elias lay awake on the settee, staring at the ceiling beams he knew by heart and understanding for the first time that silence had not been peace. It had only been absence. The thought irritated him. He rose before dawn again the next morning and found Lena already in the kitchen, one hand on the table for balance, the other reaching for the kettle. "You're upright," he said. She glanced over, a little guilty, which told him she knew exactly how this would go. "I was making tea." "You were about to drop the kettle." "I was not." "You were considering it with determination." She exhaled through her nose, not quite laughter, but closer than yesterday. "You make a person sound dramatic." "You were alone in the woods birthing a child. I think the term fits." That caught her off guard. Her eyes widened, then lowered to hide whatever had moved in them. He stepped past her and took the kettle. "Sit." "I'm improving." "You can improve from a chair." She snapped. He made tea badly, or so he assumed from the way she watched him measure leaves, as if doubting the intelligence of the process. Still, she drank it without complaint. Daniel woke hungry and loud. Elias had discovered yesterday that he disliked the child crying not because it was unpleasant, but because Lena always tensed first, like the sound would cost her something if she did not answer it fast enough. Today he reached the cradle before she did and began rocking it with one broad hand while she settled her shawl. The crying lessened at once. Lena paused halfway across the room. Daniel blinked up at Elias, affronted but willing to negotiate. Elias kept the cradle moving. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered to the child. "I'm not singing." Lena stared. Then, to his surprise, she laughed. It was small and quickly covered by her hand, but it was real, warm enough to alter the air. Daniel seemed offended by being interrupted for amusement and cried again. Lena crossed the room, still smiling despite herself, and lifted him. "You've insulted him." "He'll survive it." "You sound unconvinced." "I've met men who never did." That earned him a look sharper than the joke deserved, not suspicious, measuring, as if she had caught sight of something under the bluntness and was not sure whether to name it. He turned away first. By midday she was stronger still, enough to fold blankets and set the table before he could stop her. He found her in the front room shaking out rugs with more effort than her body should spend. "What did I say?" "That I should sit." "And what are you doing?" "I am standing," she said with calm defiance, "which is one step more useful." He took the rug from her before she could protest. Usefulness is overrated the first week after nearly freezing to death. It is not overrated when one has nowhere permanent to go. The words settled between them. There it was, the fear beneath everything else, temporary only. He had said it at the door, and she had believed him because she had to. Elias set the rug over a chair and faced her. "You have a place here until you're strong enough." "Strong enough for what?" He had no answer that didn't sound cruel or false. Her chin lifted a fraction, not in challenge but self-protection. "I don't want your pity." "That's good," he said. "I don't offer much." Then why all this?" She looked around the room as she said it, at the cradle, the stove, the folded linens drying by the hearth, the broth simmering because he'd learned she ate more when food was simply present rather than offered. Elias followed her gaze and found himself irritated again, this time because she was right to ask. "It's shelter," he said finally, "nothing more complicated." Lena nodded, as if accepting terms she already expected to lose. But later, when Daniel slept and the winter light went gold along the window glass, he noticed she had tucked one of his mended shirts around the child's feet with care, smoothing the worn fabric flat as if it was something fine. And for reasons he did not welcome, the sight stayed with him. Days began to form a pattern after that. Elias worked outside and came in more often than he used to, for water, for wood, for no reason he named. Lena moved slowly through the house, recovering in inches. She washed dishes before he could reach them, folded laundry with precise hands, set aside scraps that might become rags or mending ties. She made herself useful the way some people made themselves invisible. Daniel bound the rhythm together. He cried, slept, fed, and cried again. He changed the hours without apology. Elias learned the difference between hunger and discomfort by sound alone, and resented how quickly that knowledge took root. One evening, he walked in from the barn to find Lena seated by the fire with Daniel across her lap, whispering in Apache to soothe him. The language moved like water over stone, gentle and firm at once. Elias stopped in the doorway. The room glowed gold around them. Firelight had warmed Lena's face enough to soften the shadows there. Daniel quieted beneath the cadence of her voice, one tiny hand flexing against the blanket. For the first time in years, Elias did not step into his own house and feel the emptiness meet him first. He felt it afterward, and that was worse. A week later, he rode into town for supplies. The store went quieter when he entered, though not fully silent. Men still nodded. Women still measured flour and gossip with equal efficiency. He bought coffee, oats, lamp oil, and a bolt of soft cotton he did not explain. At the counter, old Mrs. Hargrove folded his purchases and said with false casualness, "Heard you brought someone in from the North Timber." Elias set down his coins. "You hear too much." She sniffed, hard not to when everyone is saying it. Then everyone should find better work. He left with the parcel under his arm and the familiar weight of eyes on his back. Outside, by the hitching rail, two men were discussing Rourke by name. Elias did not slow enough to be obvious, but he heard enough. Drunk again, saying the woman had run to another man just as he predicted, claiming the child proved it, claiming he'd fetch her himself when he was done letting her squirm. Elias mounted without expression. Only once he was halfway home did he realize how hard he held the reins. When he returned, Lena was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, trying to knead dough with one hand while Daniel fussed in the cradle beside her. He set down the supplies and crossed the room. "I was gone 2 hours." She looked up, mildly defensive. "Bread doesn't wait on injury." "Apparently, neither do you." Daniel began crying in earnest. Elias, already irritated by town talk and her insistence on overexerting herself, reached the cradle first and set it rocking more sharply than needed. The baby wailed louder. Lena gave him a look. "You're quarreling with him." "He started it." Despite herself, she smiled as she wiped flour from her wrist. Then she saw the cloth parcel in his hand. "What's that?" He set it on the table, something softer for swaddling. She stared at it as though the cotton were a luxury no one had earned. "You bought that for Daniel." "I bought it because the old shirts are running out of sleeves." But even as he said it, he knew the lie was poor. Her fingers rested on the parcel, lightly, reverently. "Thank you," she said. The room held quiet after that, not strained, something else. Outside, the light faded early over the snow. Inside, bread rose by the stove, the child settled at last, and Lena began humming under her breath as she worked. Elias stood there with cold still in his coat and the sound of town whispers fresh in his head. Yet the house felt warmer than it should have. Warmer than fire, accounted for. And though he did not like the thought, did not trust it, did not want what it suggested. He knew the change had a name, Lena, and he knew something else too. The town had begun to notice. He had seen it in the store, heard it at the rail, felt it in the way Rourke's name traveled faster now. He could ignore gossip. He had for years, but this was not only gossip anymore. It was pressure gathering, a story building beyond his walls. And sooner or later, stories like that always came knocking. The weather turned mean before the week was out. Not storming, worse than that. A flat, bitter cold that sat over the land without moving, as if winter had decided to watch and wait. Elias noticed it most in the horses. They stamped more, snorted harder, lifted their heads at sounds too far off for him to catch. He noticed other things too, men riding slower past the ranch road than they needed to, tracks near the south fence that did not belong to him. And the way Lena had begun listening before every door opened, before every hoofbeat reached the yard, before every evening settled too deep into quiet. She was still moving through the house with that same careful usefulness, still trying to earn space he had already given. But the warmth she had brought into the rooms now came with a shadow under it. She startled easier, paused longer, looked toward the windows too often. Daniel felt it too, or seemed to. He fussed more at dusk, as if some small animal instinct in him sensed the shape of tension before adults named it. Elias was at the workbench mending a strap when Lena came in from the back room carrying folded linens against her chest. She stopped at the sound of hooves in the lane. Only one rider. Too early for trouble, he thought, too deliberate for chance. He set the strap down and stepped to the window. Old Tom Barron, the nearest rancher west of him, was dismounting by the rail. Tom moved with the stiffness of a man who had worked too many winters without ever getting ahead of them. He tugged off a glove, rubbed at his beard, then looked toward the house with the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Elias opened the door before the man could knock. Tom nodded once. Morning. It's past noon. Tom glanced at the pale sky as if it had betrayed him. Still feels like morning. Elias waited. Tom shifted his weight. I came because I'd rather you hear it from somebody not chewing it for pleasure. Behind Elias, he could feel Lena standing still in the kitchen doorway, though she made no sound. What? Tom cleared his throat. Rourke's been talking loud in town. Says the woman ran off with his child. Says you've got both under your roof and plan to keep them. Elias' face did not move. Tom continued, slower now. He's been drinking and working himself mean over it, telling anyone who'll listen that a man has rights over his own household. Says if the law won't help him, he'll settle it himself. Silence sat between them. Tom looked embarrassed by his own presence. Marshall hasn't acted because there's no complaint fit for paper, just a drunk man shouting in public and a woman not where he expects her to be. Folks don't like it, but they're not stepping forward either. Folks rarely do. Tom gave a grim little nod. That's true enough. Inside, a board creaked. Tom's eyes flicked past Elias, then quickly away, polite enough not to stare. Just thought you should know. Rourke's not letting the story die. And the more he drinks, the more it becomes your story too. Elias leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. You warning me or her? Tom met his gaze. Both. For a moment, Elias said nothing. Then, you've done your duty. Tom put his glove back on. Didn't come as duty. He hesitated once more, then lowered his voice. Men like Rourke don't always want what they say they want. Sometimes they just can't stand being denied the thing they threw away. That landed harder than Elias liked. Tom mounted, gave one last glance toward the house, and rode off without another word. Elias shut the door. When he turned, Lena was still standing where he had felt her, white-knuckled around the folded linens, not confused, only confirmed. Daniel slept in the cradle by the stove, small mouth open, fist curled under his chin. He looked absurdly peaceful in a room that had just tightened all around him. Lena set the linens down with too much care. "He's telling people I stole the baby," she said. Elias crossed to the table and picked up the strap he'd left, though he did not resume working. "He's telling people what makes him look wronged." Her expression shifted. In that way he was learning to recognize not pain arriving, but pain already present being held in place by force. "He used to do that before cards," she said quietly. "Talk soft, laugh, make everyone feel sorry for him first. Then by nightfall he'd be shouting that he'd been cheated." Elias looked at her. She kept her eyes on the cradle. "If enough people believe a man is humiliated," she said, "they forgive what he does next." The room stayed still. Then Lena bent to straighten a blanket that did not need straightening. "He'll come here," she said. "Yes." Her hands stilled. She had probably wanted him to deny it. He had no talent for that kind of kindness. "I can leave before then," she said. The words were careful, almost rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for warning to give them form. Elias set the strap down again. "You've just stopped limping." "That won't matter to him. It matters to me." She looked up then, startled not by the words, but by how direct they came. "I mean," he said, correcting nothing and everything at once, "you're not fit to be out in this weather with a child." Lena dropped her gaze first. "That did not stop me once before. And I found you half dead." She folded her arms, not defensive exactly, but containing herself. "If I stay, he has reason to bring trouble to your door." "He already has reason. Men like that don't need facts." "That doesn't make this your burden." "No," Elias said. "It makes it my property if he brings it onto my land." She stared at him, trying to decide whether that was comfort or hardness. Perhaps it was both. He moved to the cradle and checked Daniel's blanket from habit more than need. "You're staying." Lena took in a breath like she meant to argue, then let it go, not surrender, only delay. That night the house felt too small for thought. Elias checked the locks, though no one had ever tried his doors. He stepped out twice to listen to the yard, once before bed, once after midnight. On the second round, he stood by the barn long enough for the cold to bite through his coat, staring at the dark line of trees where he had found her. A man should not have been able to drag a pregnant woman into weather like this and still keep the comfort of town sympathy. Yet there it was. By morning, whispers had spread wider. Elias did not have to go into town to know it. They came to him instead, in the shape of delayed deliveries, a ranch hand declining a day's wage without good reason, a peddler pretending sudden caution near his lane. News traveled fastest where shame was involved. 2 days later, Elias rode in anyway. He needed feed, nails, and a proper oilcloth for the kitchen floor where melted snow had begun ruining the boards. Those were reasons enough. He told himself that was why he went. The town looked ordinary when he arrived. That was the infuriating part. Children still chased each other near the mercantile. Smoke still curled from chimneys. A dog slept under the hitching rail as if men did not ruin one another every day in full view of heaven. Inside the store the talk dipped when he entered, then resumed too carefully. Mrs. Hargrove measured sugar for a customer without looking up. Mr. Thorne. He nodded once and gathered what he needed. At the far end of the counter, Deputy Mays stood with his thumbs in his belt, pretending to inspect a shipment of lamp oil he had no intention of buying. He was a broad man with gentle eyes unsuited to authority. Elias had never disliked him, which made this worse. "You hear from Rourke?" Elias asked without preamble. Mays shifted. "Hear plenty. That isn't the same as having cause." "You have cause if he threatens violence." I have bluster, Maze said, and bluster don't fit iron unless there's witness willing to swear it proper. There are witnesses. There are listeners, Maze corrected. That's different. Elias set a sack of oats on the counter harder than needed. Maze lowered his voice. I'm not saying I like it. Good, I'd hate to be unclear. The deputy sighed. I'm saying if he comes at you on your land, then I have something. Until then, I've got a drunk talking big and half the town, convincing itself he's only hurt in his pride. At the phrase, Elias felt something cold sharpen in him. Pride, always that. A burst of laughter came from outside. Then another voice, louder, familiar even before Elias turned. Caleb Rourke entered the mercantile like he owned the doorway. He was taller than Elias had pictured, not broad but rangy, with the loose swagger of a man long practiced at mistaking boldness for strength. His hat was pushed back. His coat hung open. Whiskey had already marked the hour in the flush across his cheeks, though his eyes were clear enough to be dangerous. He saw Elias immediately and smiled. There was no friendliness in it. Well, Caleb drawled, stopping near the center aisle, if it isn't the gentleman rancher. The room went still in the quiet way only public places can. Elias did not move. Caleb's gaze traveled slowly over the sacks and tools in his hands, then back to his face. Heard you've taken to collecting what belongs to other men. Mrs. Hargrove stopped measuring sugar. Deputy Mays straightened but did not step in. Elias said, You've heard wrong. Caleb laughed softly. Have I woman leaves my house, my child disappears, and all the while she's tucked under your roof like a winter stray. At that, two things happened in Elias at once. The first was anger. The second was attention, because Caleb had said my child, not that child, not some bastard. For one careless second, truth had outrun performance. Then Caleb smiled again and corrected himself for the room. Or maybe not mine. Hard to say with a woman like that, isn't it? The words drew a few uncomfortable shifts from the listeners. Not agreement, not objection either. Elias set his purchases down on the counter one by one, careful as a man putting away blades. You called him yours just now. Caleb's smile flattened. Did I, he said lightly, must have misspoken. No, Elias said, you forgot your audience. The room tightened. Mays took half a step forward. Now. But Caleb was already laughing again, louder this time, meant for everyone. Oh, that's rich. The shut-in rancher thinks he knows my household better than I do. He turned to the room. Maybe I should thank him. Saved me the trouble of burying another man's shame. Lena's face flashed in Elias' mind then, drawn, exhausted, whispering he knew. The realization settled whole. Caleb had never doubted the child was his. He had doubted only whether responsibility served him. A bastard child gave him grievance. A true child gave him obligation. So he had chosen grievance. And now that someone else had taken Lena in, now that she was beyond his reach, beyond the daily proof of his own cowardice, he wanted the old power back. Not family, control. Elias looked at him with something flatter than anger. You threw her out because the child was yours. Caleb's expression flickered. They're tiny, fast, but enough. Then the grin returned, uglier now. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Makes you noble, taking in a poor abandoned woman. Maybe you're hoping gratitude buys more than quiet. The insult hung crude in the air. Mays stepped in at last. That's enough. Caleb spread his hands. I'm just a husband asking after his wife. You told town the baby wasn't yours, Elias said, and if he isn't, I don't want him. Caleb's tone turned sharp, but the woman's still mine. There it was, not hidden at all, not the child, not truth, possession. The words seemed to strike the room one listener at a time. Mrs. Hargrove looked up slowly. Someone near the stove muttered under his breath. Even Mais's face changed. Caleb realized it a moment too late and pushed harder, mistaking silence for weakness. "She owes me for the way she shamed me," he said. "Whatever's in that bundle, whatever story she's fed him." He jerked his chin toward Elia's. "None of it changes that she was mine first." Elias crossed the distance between them before he fully felt his own feet move. He did not grab him, did not shout. He simply stopped close enough that Caleb had to tilt his head back a fraction to keep pretending ease. "Listen carefully," Elias said. The store had gone so still the stove's ticking iron sounded loud. "You do not speak of her like that again." Caleb held the grin half a second longer, then let it slip. "Or what?" Elias' voice never rose. "Or you'll learn there are men in this territory who don't need whiskey or witnesses to finish a thing." Mais inserted himself then, palm out. "That's enough, both of you." But the moment had already shifted. People had heard what mattered, not all at once perhaps, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to know Caleb was less injured husband than hungry tyrant. Enough to know Lena had not been cast out for sin, but for inconvenience. Caleb stepped back first. The fury in his face made him look older, meaner, almost childish in the way cruel men often did when denied an audience. He yanked his hat lower. "This isn't settled." "No," Elias said, "it is." Caleb shoved past Mais and stormed out, shoulder-checking the door hard enough to rattle the glass. For a moment no one moved. Then Mrs. Hargrove quietly resumed folding paper. "Well," she said to no one in particular, that answered more than he meant it to. Elias picked up his purchases. Mais caught his arm lightly. "Take care going home." Elias looked at him. The deputy exhaled. "I still need cause, but if he crosses onto your place looking for trouble, I'd advise him against it after today." "That's not the same as stopping him." "No," Mais admitted. "It's not." When Elias rode back, the cold had sharpened and the sky threatened snow. He did not feel either. His mind kept turning over every word Caleb had spoken, not because the man was clever, but because he was. Control, shame, mine, that was the whole rotten center of it. He reached the ranch by late afternoon. Lena was on the porch wrapped in a shawl, Daniel against her shoulder, beneath a blanket. She had likely been watching the road longer than she'd admit. Relief showed first when she saw him, then fear at whatever she read in his face. What happened? Elias took the reins to the rail and climbed the steps. Inside. She followed without argument. That frightened him more than panic would have. Once the door shut and the child was settled in the cradle, he told her everything. Not softened, not delayed. Caleb's performance in the store, the slip, the demand, the final ugliness of the woman's still mine. Lena sat very still through all of it. Only her hands changed. One palm pressed hard against her skirt as if bracing pain into place. When he finished, she stared at the floorboards a long while. Then she said, "I knew he would say that before he said anything else." Elias leaned against the table, arms crossed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her head came up at that. "Tell you what?" "That he knew." She gave a faint, joyless breath. "I did tell you. I said he knew the child was his." "You didn't tell me he would come back for you anyway." Something flickered in her face. Not guilt, resignation. "I thought if I said it plainly," she answered, it would become your problem in a way I had no right to ask. He almost said it already is. Instead, he looked at the cradle, at Daniel sleeping through revelations too large for him. He doesn't want the boy, Elias said. No. He wants you where he left you. Yes. The directness of it cut. Lena folded her hands together in her lap. A man like Caleb can bear many things. He can bear debt. He can bear ridicule if he gets to laugh first. He can bear hunger, liquor, even his own failures, if he can pin them somewhere else. What he cannot bear is being defied, not by someone he thinks belongs beneath him. Elias studied her. She spoke about her own life the way other people might explain animal habits. Practical. Detached, not because it hurt less, but because feeling it each time would have killed her. Then, quietly, she added, "He is angry because I survived where he meant me to disappear." That was the truest thing said all day. The fire burned low. Outside, wind dragged across the yard in long, dry sweeps. Inside, Daniel stirred and made a brief sleeping sound, small and innocent and entirely dependent on the mercy of the adults around him. Lena looked toward the cradle, then at Elias. "I have to leave." The words were calm enough to pass for decision. Only her eyes gave away the strain behind them. "No. He'll keep coming if I stay." "Yes." "Then you know why." Elias pushed off the table. "I said no." Her voice tightened. "You cannot keep saying that as though it settles the world." "No," he said, "just this house." "I am not asking to be cruel. I'm trying to keep him from tearing through what is yours. What's mine includes this land and anyone under my roof." She stared. "You cannot mean that." "Why not?" "Because people do not hold to words like that for women like me." The sentence landed softly, harder than shouting. For women like me, women accused first and heard last, women of the wrong blood, the wrong story, the wrong amount of damage visible on them. Women towns accepted only when useful and cast aside when a man chose offense. Elias felt anger rise again, though not at her. "At some point," he said, each word careful now, "you're going to have to stop measuring me by the men who failed you." Lena flinched, as if struck. He regretted it immediately. Not the truth, the force. She looked down, blinking too slowly. "At some point," she said after a moment, "you may have to accept that I learned those measurements for a reason." The room held that between them. Then Daniel began to cry. The sound broke whatever might have worsened next. Lena rose too fast, swayed, caught herself on the chair. Elias moved instinctively, one hand at her elbow before she could fall. She froze under the contact. So did he. Her sleeve was warm from the room. Her arm was far slighter than it had looked under work and shawls. He felt the exact moment she realized he was steadying her and not restraining her. Then she stepped back. Not fearful, only careful. "I'm all right," she said. He let his hand fall. "You shouldn't rise that fast." Apparently, I shouldn't do anything without instruction." "That isn't what I know." She closed her eyes once, briefly, then went to the cradle. He turned away before the look on her face could settle fully into him. For the next 2 days, the threat changed shape. No direct visit, no confrontation, only harassment. A fence rail broken in the night along the north pasture. Fresh boot tracks under the kitchen window come morning. A dead rabbit hung from the latch of the barn with no note attached, which somehow made it filthier. Elias cut it down before Lena woke and buried it beyond the paddock without comment, but she saw the disturbed earth anyway and understood. He rode to town and found Maze. The deputy came out to look at the tracks that afternoon, crouched by the window, rubbed his jaw, and said the sort of useless truths lawmen often said when law had already failed. Could be boys.
It is.
I know, Maze stood, but knowing and proving are brothers who seldom ride together.
You going to do anything?
I'll speak to Rourke. Elias looked at him until the deputy had the decency to look tired. I'll speak hard, Maze added. Bring a hymn book too, maybe he'll repent from boredom. Maze's mouth twitched despite himself, then flattened. I'm trying, Thorn. Try closer to the problem. By evening the ranch felt watched, not always visibly, just enough. Lena moved quieter now. The little hum she sometimes had while folding laundry or warming milk had disappeared. Daniel cried more at night, sensing strain as children did. Elias slept in fragments, rifle near the door, boots on. On the third night she found him at the kitchen table long after midnight, lamp low, hat off, staring at nothing with a cup of coffee gone black and cold. She stood in the doorway with a blanket around her shoulders, hair loose down her back. Have you slept at all?
Some.
That isn't an answer. It's the one I've got. She came farther in. Daniel, miracle of miracles, had stayed asleep. The house was quiet enough that each log settling in the stove sounded like a decision. Lena stopped across from him. I can still go. He did not look up immediately. If she left, the ranch might quiet again. The danger might move with her. The story in town might shift off his name. His life might return to the narrow, predictable lines he understood. He thought of the spare room empty, the cradle gone, the house clean and silent and deadened the way it had been. Safe, he thought of her in the snow, of Caleb's voice saying the woman's still mine, of Daniel sleeping with one fist tucked beneath his chin, unaware the world had already begun choosing what kind of men surrounded him. And he hated that there was a split second, only that but real, in which he understood the temptation of letting her go for the sake of peace. Fear did that, not fear of Caleb, fear of attachment, fear that taking full responsibility for their safety meant admitting they mattered beyond duty, beyond temporary, beyond shelter. He lifted his eyes to hers. She read something in his silence and went pale in a way that had nothing to do with weather. There it was, the old lesson returning to claim her, that eventually every door weighed cost against kindness and chose cost. Elias stood so abruptly the chair legs scraped hard against the floor. No. Her breath caught. I nearly thought it, he said, voice rougher than he intended. And I'm telling you that because I won't lie in my own house. I nearly thought about what would happen if you left, about quiet, about ending this before it worsens. She did not move. The lamp flame trembled faintly. He stepped around the table, closer now, not enough to crowd her. But the fact that I thought it, he said, doesn't make it right. It makes it cowardice. And I've had enough of that from other men. Something in her face broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a long-held seam giving way. I don't know how to stay, she whispered. Not when staying keeps costing someone. Elias looked at her for a long moment, then said the truest thing he had yet managed. It costs me more to picture you gone. Silence, no fire crackle, no wind, nothing, only that sentence hanging between them like something both too fragile and too heavy to touch. Lena's eyes filled too quickly for her to hide it. She turned her face away at once, ashamed of tears she had earned 10 times over. Elias did not reach for her. He wanted to. That was problem enough. Instead, he picked up the blanket slipping from her shoulder and settled it back there with careful hands, no more than a brief brush of fabric and knuckles. You're staying, he said again. This time it meant more than shelter. She knew it, so did he, and that frightened them both. The next morning broke bright and merciless. Snow had crusted hard over the yard in the night, turning every footprint into a cast of itself. Elias stood on the porch before sunrise with a coffee cup cooling in his hand, looking over rails, barn, road, tree line. The ranch seemed still. He no longer trusted stillness. Behind him, the house made its new sounds, the soft shift of Lena moving in the kitchen, the brief, wavering cry of Daniel waking. The floorboard near the stove that had begun squeaking because she crossed it so often, small sounds, domestic sounds. He had spent years cutting such things out of his life. Now he knew each one by heart. That knowledge unsettled him. It also kept him rooted where he stood. By mid-morning, a rider came hard up the lane, Deputy Mays again. His horse was lathered, his hat shoved back, his expression already apologizing before he reached the rail. Elias met him in the yard. What? Mays dismounted and rubbed a hand over his mouth. Rourke's been at the saloon since dawn, says he's coming out here by noon and taking what's his. Loud enough that half the town's heard him. Loud enough I can't pretend it's smoke anymore. No, Elias said. Now it's a fire. Mays glanced toward the house. I'm sending word to the marshal. He's out near Red Creek on a cattle dispute and won't make it before afternoon. But this, he lowered his voice, this is public enough now. If Rourke rides out and starts something, he'll have no shield left. Elias nodded once. Mays hesitated. People are talking different since the store. That's so. Some are ashamed they listened as long as they did. The deputy looked away briefly. Some are only curious, but they'll come if there's a spectacle. Folks always do. Elias almost said he wanted none of them. Then he thought of what town silence had cost Lena already. Good, he said instead. Let them watch. Mays seemed surprised. Elias wasn't sure he blamed him. Inside, Lena had heard enough through the door to know trouble was no longer a rumor. She stood in the front room with Daniel in her arms, face pale but steady. She did not ask if Caleb was coming. She only asked how many. One, probably, Elias said. He likes audiences more than allies. That does not make him harmless. No. She looked toward the window, where the winter light lay, white across the glass. If he comes in front of people, he'll turn it into a performance. He already has. And if he says, I belong to him. Elias held her gaze. Then he'll hear otherwise. Something moved through her expression, hope perhaps, or fear of hoping. Daniel fussed and pressed his face into her shawl. Elias stepped forward without thinking and laid one hand against the child's back, firm and gentle. Daniel quieted almost at once. Lena looked down at his hand, then up at him. He removed it slowly. Stay inside when he arrives, he said. She shook her head. No. This isn't for you to stand through. It has always been for me to stand through. He wanted to argue. He knew from her tone that he would lose, so he settled for not alone. By late morning, riders began appearing on the roads. Not many, enough. Tom Berrin first. Then Mrs. Hargrove in a wagon she drove better than most men rode. Then 2 ranch hands from the eastern spread, followed by the blacksmith, then Mays again with the schoolteacher's husband at his side. They did not come onto the porch. They stayed in the yard, near the rail, near the lane, in that awkward half-circle of a community trying to decide whether witnessing counts as courage. Lena stood just inside the doorway with Daniel, shawl wrapped tight, spine straight despite the strain Elias could feel in every line of her. He took his place on the porch. For once he did not resent being seen. At noon, Caleb rode in. He came alone, just as Elias expected. That was part of the man's vanity. He believed one man, done loudly enough, could equal force. He swung down from the saddle with exaggerated ease, saw the small gathered crowd, and smiled like someone pleased his theater was full. "Well now," he said, looking from face to face. "Didn't know I'd be giving a show." "No," Elias said from the porch. "You're getting one." Caleb's smile thinned. His gaze slid to Lena in the doorway. The expression that crossed his face then made several people in the yard shift uneasily. It was not love, not anger alone either. Recognition with ownership under it. The look of a man spotting a tool he thought lost. "There you are," he said to her, as if speaking to a runaway horse. "You've made enough fuss." Lena did not move. Daniel stirred against her shoulder. Caleb's eyes dropped to the child, then away again almost immediately, as though even pretending interest was too much labor. "Come down," he said. "Pack what's yours and be done with this." No one spoke. The wind scraped lightly over the roof. Elias rested one hand on the porch post and said, "She's not going anywhere with you." Caleb laughed, though it came meaner than amused. "That's so. Since when do you speak for another man's wife?" "Since you forgot she's a person before she's anything else." That landed in the crowd like a stone in shallow water, small splash, wide ripple. Caleb's face tightened. "You getting sanctimonious now, Thorn, don't suit you." "No," Elias said. "What suits me is plainness, so let's be plain. You cast her out in winter while carrying your child. Then you told town he wasn't yours because responsibility burdened you more than lying did. Now you've realized she lived without your permission, and you can't bear it." A murmur moved through the yard. Caleb turned toward the watchers, palms slightly out as if they were all reasonable people, and only Elias had mislaid sense. "Hear that? He's built a whole noble tale out of a woman's tears." No one answered him. That more than protest would have chipped at his confidence. He looked back to Lena. "Tell them then, tell them what you are." Lena's fingers tightened on Daniel's blanket. Elias felt his own body brace. She stepped out onto the threshold fully, into the cold light where there was no hiding. When she spoke, her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I am the woman you dragged into the woods because you feared fatherhood more than shame." Her gaze stayed fixed on Caleb. "I am the wife you called unfaithful because truth made you smaller than gossip did. And I am the mother of the child you denied until another man gave him shelter." Caleb's face darkened violently. "You lying?" "No," Lena said, "just that. No tremor, no apology." The simplicity of it seemed to hit harder than accusation. Caleb took a step toward the porch. Maze moved at once, hand rising. "Hold." Caleb stopped, more from surprise than obedience. Elias came down one step, then another, until he stood level with him in the yard. He did not crowd him, did not posture. He only planted himself where Caleb would have to go through him to reach the house. "This ends now," Elias said. Caleb sneered. "You going to kill me in front of witnesses?" "No." Something colder entered Elias' voice. "I'm going to tell you the truth in front of them, and then you're going to leave knowing every man and woman here heard it." The crowd stayed utterly still. Elias went on. "She stays because she chooses to, not because I've hidden her, not because you own her. And if you set foot on this property again with threat in your mouth or liquor in your blood, I'll see you bound for the jail in town if law arrives first." He paused. "And into the dirt if it does." The words were quiet. That was what made them land, not rage, certainty. Caleb searched his face for bluff and did not find enough of it. Still, vanity forced one last attempt. He barked a laugh and pointed toward Lena. You think she wants this place, wants you? His eyes turned ugly. You're a grave with a roof. She's with you because she's got nowhere else to crawl. Something in Elias shifted then, not temper, decision. He turned slightly enough to look back at the porch, at Lena, at Daniel, at the house that had been all order and no life for so long he had mistaken it for peace. Then he faced the town. This woman stays under my protection, he said, every word deliberate, and not from pity. Silence widened. Caleb stared. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes sharpened. Tom Barron folded his arms and watched with sudden intensity, as if understanding he was seeing a man choose his future out loud. Elias kept going, because stopping now would be another form of cowardice. She brought warmth back into my house where there'd been none. She brought decency with her when most of you brought only opinion. She owes no explanation to the man who used her, and no apology to the town that let him. The last lines struck the gathered people harder than anything aimed at Caleb. Several looked away. Mays did not. Neither did Mrs. Hargrove. Caleb's face had gone blotchy with fury. You self-righteous bastard. No, Elias said, just late. It was the nearest thing to confession many there had likely ever heard from him. Caleb lunged then, not well, not fully. A hard step forward, arm lifting as if to seize Elias by the coat. Elias caught the wrist before it got halfway there. The movement was clean, fast, final. Caleb sucked in breath as Elias twisted just enough to make the man feel the imbalance under his own bones. No brawl, no flurry, only control so complete it stripped the moment of any heroics. Don't, Elias said. Caleb tried to wrench free, failed. Mays stepped in from the side, iron now in his hand. That's enough. By authority of the territory, I'm warning you before every witness here. Another threat, another trespass, another attempt at force, and you'll answer for it. Elias released him. Caleb stumbled back one pace and caught himself, humiliated in the ugliest way, without spectacle to hide behind. He looked around for sympathy, found none. Tom Barron's face was closed. Mrs. Hargrove looked disgusted. Even the ranch hands who had once laughed at Rourke's jokes now watched him the way men watch a snake too close to the henhouse. He saw it. He saw every bit of it. And because he had no power left but malice, he spat in the snow and said to Lena, You think this means they'll ever make room for you? Lena held his gaze. Then, with a calm that silenced the yard again, she answered, I only needed one man to. Caleb flinched as if struck. Elias felt the words somewhere deep and immediate. Mays stepped forward. Mount up. For a second it looked as though Caleb might do something stupid enough to end it differently. Then calculation won. He turned, yanked himself into the saddle, and rode out with all the dignity rage could fake. Nobody moved until he was a shrinking shape down the road. The wind returned first, then breath, then the strange, brittle shifting of people unsure whether they had witnessed a defense, a scandal, or a vow. Mrs. Hargrove was the first to break it. Well, she said, dusting her gloves together though they were clean, I believe I've been ashamed long enough. She climbed from her wagon with more determination than grace and walked straight to the porch. Lena stiffened automatically. Mrs. Hargrove stopped one respectful step away and looked at Daniel first, not as accusation but recognition. Then she lifted her eyes to Lena's face. I should have asked after you months ago instead of listening to a man who smelled of whiskey and vanity, she said. I did not. That was wrong.
Lena said nothing.
The older woman nodded once, accepting the silence as earned. I've got broth, clean linen, and a bassinet from my daughter's last baby if you'll have it. A pause, then Lena, clearly unused to speech like this, answered in a voice nearly as soft as Daniel's breathing. Thank you. Mrs. Hargrove sniffed once, as if gratitude made her uncomfortable, and turned to Elias. And you, don't get smug, you waited too long too.
I know.
That seemed to satisfy her. The rest came slower. Tom Barron tipped his hat to Lena before mounting again. One of the ranch hands muttered something about fixing the north fence if it had been cut again. Mays promised to put the threat into proper writing and left with the sort of expression men wore when they wished decency had shown up sooner. By evening the yard was empty again, but not the same. Inside, the house held a quiet so altered it felt newly built. Lena set Daniel in the cradle and stood by the stove without moving, as if the day had outrun her body's understanding. Elias hung his coat by the door. Neither spoke at first. The fire settled. A kettle began to hum. Finally Lena said, "You didn't have to say all that in front of them."
He looked over. Yes, I did.
Her hands folded together at her waist. No one has ever, she stopped. He waited. She tried again. No one has ever chosen my side once the choosing cost them something. Elias felt the truth of that like weight. He crossed the room, stopping near enough to hear her breath, but not near enough to take what had not been offered.
I should have done it sooner, he said, sooner than today. Sooner than the day I found you.
She frowned slightly, not understanding. I told myself I was offering shelter, he said, temporary, simple, clean enough to keep me untroubled. He looked toward Daniel sleeping in the cradle, but that was never the whole truth. I was only slower to admit it than I should have been. Lena's eyes searched his face. The lamp light softened the strain there. She looked tired, beautiful in the honest way hardship sometimes left behind, and far too vulnerable to be met with anything but truth. I thought, she said carefully, that if you let yourself care, you would send us away. That arrow found its mark because it was almost what he had nearly done. I know. She inhaled sharply, hearing what lay beneath the words. Elias nodded once. I was afraid.
Of Caleb.
He let out a short breath. No, men like him are simple, ugly but simple.
Then of what?
He looked around the room, at the stove she used more than he ever had, at the folded blankets, at the patched rug she'd turned the other way because the worn side showed less, at the cradle, at her. When my wife died, he said, and the words came rough from disuse, people told me grief would ease if I opened the house again, invited company, took another wife someday. They talked as if hearts were rooms you could repaper. He swallowed once, so I closed mine instead.
Thought that if nothing entered, nothing could be taken.
Lena's face gentled with a grief of her own at hearing his plainly at last. I did not take you in out of pity, he said. I stayed because every day you were here, something that had gone dead in me stirred. The house sounded different, then it felt different, then I did. Her eyes filled before she could hide it. He continued, because he had waited too long for honesty already. You brought me back to life in ways I resented first and needed after, and that frightened me because I knew exactly what life can lose. Silence held them, not empty silence, living silence. Lena whispered, I never expected to be wanted, not without price, not in daylight. The words broke him more cleanly than anything Caleb had said. He took one step closer. "Then hear me in daylight," he said. "I want you here." Tears slipped down her face now, quiet and unhidden. She made no move to wipe them away. "And Daniel?" she asked, because of course she would ask that too. Elias looked toward the cradle, toward the small sleeping child whose existence had altered everything without permission. "Daniel was never your burden alone," he said. "Not once I knew." She drew in a trembling breath. "You say that as if it were simple." "It is," his voice softened. "That's part of it. I am not offering easy, I'm offering truth." Her mouth shook on something like a smile and grief together. "You speak terribly when it matters most." "I know." That did it. A laugh escaped her through tears. Small, warm, real. He had heard that sound before in fragments. Never with this much surrender in it. Without thinking too long, because thinking had ruined enough already, he reached up and touched her face, brushing one tear gently away with his thumb. She did not pull back. He let his hand rest there a moment, careful enough to leave her every choice. "I love you," he said. The words did not feel practiced. They felt costly, earned. "I'm afraid of it," he added, because anything less than the full truth would fail them now. Afraid of losing again. Afraid of what hope can do when it's taken. "But I love you all the same." Lena closed her eyes briefly under his hand. When she opened them, there was no uncertainty left in them, only wonder and the ache of believing something she had once thought impossible. "I love you too," she whispered. "Not because you saved me in the woods, because you saw me after, because you kept seeing me when it grew inconvenient, because with you I do not feel borrowed." He bent toward her slowly, gave her time. She met him halfway. The kiss was not desperate, it was reverent, careful in the way deep things often were when they first became visible. It tasted faintly of cold and tea and everything they had nearly lost by waiting. When they parted, Daniel made an indignant noise from the cradle, as if objecting to being excluded from the evening's events. Lena laughed again, fuller this time, and turned to lift him. Elias watched mother and child in the firelight and knew, with a clarity that felt almost merciful, that he would rather face every fear on the plains than return to the emptiness that had preceded them. Caleb left the territory 2 weeks later, not dramatically. Men like him rarely departed under the same kind of noise they arrived with. Once witnesses turned, once Mays put warnings into paper, once the blacksmith refused him credit, and the saloon stopped finding his performances amusing, his size in town diminished quickly. He tried once more to spread the old version of the story. No one repeated it. That was the end of him. Spring came slowly after that, in patches first. Dark earth showing through the snow by the south rail, water running under ice before it dared break free. The house changed with the season, then beyond it. Lena opened windows on warmer afternoons and let fresh air move through rooms that had been shut too long. She planted herbs in boxes near the kitchen steps. Daniel grew rounder and louder and opinionated about blankets. Mrs. Hargrove brought the promised bassinet and stayed for tea. Tom Barron's sister came once with mending thread and again with nothing but company. People still watched. But now they watched with the ordinary curiosity reserved for happiness hard-won, not scandal half-believed. Elias found himself in town more often. At first for supplies, then for a church social he had not attended in 7 years, because Lena wished to see the quilting display and Daniel, absurdly overdressed in a knitted cap from Mrs. Hargrove, drew smiles from women who had once gone silent when Lena entered. Elias noticed every one of those women made a point of greeting her now, late apologies, imperfect. Still, He noticed Lena accepted them with more grace than the town deserved. One evening in early thaw, he found her on the porch at sunset with Daniel in her lap, watching light gather gold in the wet fields. He leaned on the post beside her. After a while she said, "Mrs. Hargrove asked today whether I'd like the preacher told to be ready by summer."
Elias kept his face straight. Did she? She did.
And what answer did you give? Lena looked up at him with that quiet humor that had become one of his favorite things under heaven. I told her such matters ought to involve the man in question.
Sound policy.
She waited. He understood then that there were moments when a man could keep hiding behind understatement and lose something by inches, even in joy. So he knelt before her chair in the porch light, one hand resting lightly against Daniel's tiny boot, the other taking Lena's free hand. "I intend to marry you," he said, "if you'll have me, properly, publicly, with every witness needed to make the whole territory tired of hearing about it." Lena's smile broke wide and unguarded, more beautiful than anything youth or ease alone could have made. Tears rose in her eyes again, though softer now, not from fear, from relief. "Yes," she said, "I'll have you." Daniel, feeling perhaps that his approval had not yet been requested, kicked once against Elias' wrist and made a pleased, gurgling sound. Elias looked down at him. "You're overdressed for negotiations too." Lena laughed so hard she had to set her forehead briefly against his shoulder. They married in June, not lavishly, not grandly, but fully. The church windows were thrown open to summer air. Mrs. Hargrove cried without secrecy. Tom Barron stood straighter than usual. Mays looked almost smug to have lived long enough to see a good ending occur under his jurisdiction. Even the preacher, who had once been too cautious with his sympathy, spoke plainly of mercy, courage, and new life made honestly. Lena wore a simple dress the color of cream, no lace wasted on it, no frills. Just clean lines and quiet dignity. She carried Daniel in one arm until the last possible moment, then handed him to Mrs. Hargrove with obvious reluctance. Elias had thought himself too old for public joy. He discovered he was only too starved for it. By autumn, the house no longer remembered how to be silent. Daniel had learned to laugh from the center of himself. Lena sang while kneading bread. Elias, against all prior evidence, could be drawn into smiling before breakfast if Daniel grabbed a fistful of his beard shadow and crowed like he had discovered a new continent. The second chair at the table no longer sat unused. Neither did the third. One evening, after the first cold hint of another winter touched the air, Elias came in from the barn carrying Daniel against his chest. The boy was wrapped in a wool blanket, cheeks pink from the wind, one small hand latched stubbornly in Elias' shirt. Lena looked up from the stove. The kitchen glowed around her, warm light, warm bread, warm life. For one suspended moment, Elias saw the old house and the new one together, the years of silence overlaid with what stood before him now. Then the old version faded, as it finally deserved to. Daniel leaned back in his arms and looked up at him with complete trust, not obligation. Not accident, choice. Elias adjusted the blanket higher around the child and crossed the room toward his wife. Outside, evening settled over the ranch in blue and gold. Inside, home was waiting. If this story stayed with you, ride with us again. Subscribe and help keep these frontier tales alive for the next file at night. Because out here, every name has a past, every trail has a cost, and every sunset still remembers. Until next time, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.